Most of us spend a quarter of our lives in the place we call school. And the more time we spend there, the more we complain.
It's no secret that the schooling system in America has flaws. So, join us once a month as we take a look at the ins and outs of American schooling to find the bad and the good.
Let's get started then. I'm Amar.
I'm Matthew.
And this is Our Side of the Coin, Season 2. Hey, welcome back to another episode on Our Side of the Coin. Today, we're going to be talking about online learning, advantages, disadvantages, and what we feel about it. Matt, take it away.
I am very tired right now, and I think that sums up pretty well my experience and opinion on online learning. Mostly,
Yeah, so do you want to continue or do you want me to say stuff?
I have said my piece.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, so the consensus here is pretty much agreed. We're both not big fans of exactly online learning, but why, we're going to break it down for you, why as college students, especially as freshmen entering college this year, online learning was not the most ideal situation. So we were just actually looking through some statistics online, and we found there was a lot of data, old data. We were hard pressed to find any recent data on pandemic studies, which is interesting, but it might just be too early for that.
If you're listening to this in the future, there's probably 10 billion studies on it. But until then, this is what we got.
Yeah, exactly. And so what initial studies before, online learning became the mainstream because of the pandemic were indicating was that online learning is better for a lot of students given its flexibility, given its apparently increased interactions with and personalization, as well as retention rates. And so essentially we're just here to break that down, tell you why it's all bogus, and give you our experience. So let's start off with, I think the first foremost thing that we want to talk about is the retention rate. Matt, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, that was very weird to me when Amar read that, because mine, Amar's, and basically any student's experience was you put on the lecture and then you go watch a YouTube video or something. Yeah, it was really my experience. It was very hard to focus on synchronous lectures and asynchronous lectures. I don't know. It's just something about being in your own room where no one's watching you, and then listening to a professor who, let's admit, probably not great voice audio quality and pretty hard to focus.
Yeah, and so I think the statistic that stood out to us, according to Dexway.com, which, a disclaimer, they are a online educational company, they claim that online courses have increased student retention rates from anything from 25% to 60%, which, just coming from, and their statistic comes from the Research Institute of America. Right off the bat, I can tell you when you talk to most students, we might not be able to speak for our K-12 students, but in terms of college students, where, especially for STEM-related courses and logically based courses, it's kind of just, it doesn't work like that, right? Because the way these courses work, and there is memorization, biology is technically considered a STEM course, bio is nothing but memorization for most of it, at least in the undergrad level classes, right? And you, like Matt was saying, you often, and this kind of ties in with the topic we wanted to talk about later with the idea of personalization, in a mass setting, right, where we went from being lectured in a lecture hall now to being lectured over Zoom, nothing's changed, except that it's now a million times harder to actually pay attention to begin with. Because, at least when you're in a lecture hall, we can talk about social conformity, right? You don't see it at a lot of, you might see it at some institutions, but a lot of higher level public undergraduate institutions, people are there because they're paying for the courses, they need the courses for their degree requirements, they have some sort of test or some career which is dependent on that knowledge, right? So you don't see people, unlike in high school, on their phone, throwing papers at each other, that sort of thing. The idea of a lecture hall is beyond, and I understand the argument, right? And I think we'll touch on that right after that. A lecture hall isn't suitable for everybody. Not everybody likes to be lectured at, and I agree with that. I consider myself a very kinesthetic learner. I like to get my hands on I like to learn with my hands. The more I'm able to do stuff, the more I'm able to work with stuff, the better I'm able to retain it, right? The thing is, even being in that presence, but I think, just intuitively, if you're in an environment where the social norm is expected that you're paying attention, people are able to easily contribute to the discussion, right? Online learning, it's a little harder when you don't have body cues, when you don't have facial cues. Oftentimes, everybody's camera is off, everybody's muted. To speak up in the middle of a lecture would be almost considered out of the norm for a lot of these classes, which is kind of sad, in my opinion, because you kind of lose a lot of the, what's the word here?
It was just way harder to engage.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like Matt said, it's just a lot harder to engage with the topic. And yeah, I mean, that's my little tidbit on, at least in terms of retention rate and paying attention. If you can't pay attention initially with the class, I don't think you can reasonably expect somebody to retain information unless they go out of their way to relearn the information, which is the most inefficient way I've ever learned anything in my life.
Yeah, I don't know. I would agree with a lot of what you said. I had a very similar experience. Just like you are correct, and we'll definitely get onto it later about like lectures aren't for everyone, but like specifically comparing lectures. Like I like learning through lectures. So comparing like a lecture in person versus online, I think it's pretty much just like plainly inferior online. So yeah, my main thing was what we were talking about before with asking questions. The professors, every time, it was funny to me, like they would basically beg you to ask questions. And no one ever did. Ever. In my computer science class, there was one student who was the only one who would ask questions. And he would ask all the questions I needed. But see, the issue is, it's just weird online because you don't get any of that feedback you do in person. And it's that like social thing. And I'm gonna be honest, I think that's just, maybe some of it is because it's just new. If online school continues to be an option, if more people do it, maybe they'll develop some norms and make it easier to ask questions. But the experience last semester was really hard to ask questions and like work with the concepts, because like you said, with these STEM stuff, you can't just take in the information and then expect to know it. Like you gotta practice it, and the way I would normally do that would be by asking the professor, which doesn't work. And then also just aesthetically, staring at a screen, I don't like it. It's your eyes. Like normally, like it's just like you're staring at like just like some plain background, and maybe your professor has a camera or not, and maybe it's good.
Yeah.
Just a bad experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely love the points you were making there, because I definitely agree. When you're in, and, a funny story on my end is I had, because, last summer I had a lot of free time on my hand. I'm pretty sure all of us had a lot of free time on my hand. So naturally, like any kid who was planning on commuting anyway would do, I decided to renovate my room, right? I had time. My parents were like, okay, cool. My room hasn't been renovated since 2001? 2002, whenever the house was built. And so it was basically a nursery room, right? And so I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to be studying here, at least for the fall semester at the time. I redid my room, got a desk I like, painted the walls a neutral color I liked, did all the little things, those like nice, sweet home blogs and what yellow or blue, it focuses, improves your focus. And yeah, I did all that, right? And I'm sitting here now.
That's pretty nice in my opinion.
And I don't get me wrong, I'm very happy with how it turned out. But we're not here to talk about how my room turned out. We're here to talk about why sitting in the same room for 13 to 14 hours a day for, God, it's already been almost 365 plus days, right? Or almost 400 days at this point. You just can't. Like, people need, and I wish I could bring you a statistic on this. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's already being researched. There's a lot of research being ready to be pumped out that's about to prove everything we're saying here, right?
Yeah.
But we don't have it yet because it's March or May of 2021.
Yeah.
And peer reviewing journals takes an ungodly amount of time. Yeah, no, I was just saying, like Matt said, a change of environment I think is essential to keeping the brain fresh. So let me talk about, for example, the Pomodoro Technique, right? The Pomodoro Technique, for those not familiar, is studying 25 minutes or 50 minutes on and then taking 5 to 10 minutes off, right? If you think about it, we inadvertently through school were trying to learn via the Pomodoro Technique. You would have a 60-minute class, get 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever break between your next class, fresh up on some other things. You by the next class, you mostly either talk with friends, everybody had a way to vent, relax, and clear their mind almost in a mindful You get my point. My point here is that we were inadvertently... Exactly, decompress. Thank you, Matthew. We were inadvertently forcing ourselves to take breaks and then reconvene, and that was improving our attention span, I would argue. A lot of people have this idea that when you're at home, and it's very easy to fall behind, especially with everything being asynchronous, or even the synchronous stuff, there's just so much content. Professors feel they're time crunched because everything's online. They don't receive actual student feedback. They don't know their pacing, so they keep the standard pacing, and they assume everybody's doing okay. Come the end of the semester, everybody's suddenly flailing around like, oh no, I never learned XYZ. And you end up with the mess that we've got in the undergraduate institutions of America right now.
And yeah, I did. I literally learned like the last 3 topics of my computer science exam the night before I took it.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the problem. This is why I know there are a lot of proponents for online learning out there, right? And I get it, guys. Don't get me wrong. I really don't miss commuting 2 hours a day. Like, if we're being honest, I really do like being home sometimes. When I'm done with schoolwork, I don't have to, engage in too many outside activities.
Don't gotta change clothes.
Don't gotta change clothes. Exactly. All the little stuff is nice. It's a very, very nice convenience, especially in the modern world with so much entertainment in our hands. I think that blessing is a curse at the same time. We've developed a lot of...
Before we move on, I just wanted to... The thing you were talking about before with staying in one place, that's definitely a thing. You'll probably be able to, find out more about this, but, the human brain, based on my understanding, is really connected to, place and, location. And so the problem I had with staying in, one place the whole time is that there's no boundaries, like what you were saying. When you stay at home and then you go to school, your brain can switch registers, and when you walk in those doors, you go into focus mode. It's like, all right, I'm here to learn. And then you leave and you go home and you are there to do everything but learn. But when you do everything in your life in one room, it just makes it way harder to know when school's over and when school is starting. And that was my problem too. I would spend 10 hours a day working at quarter capacity, and so I would not have any free time to relax, nor would I be getting any work done.
The environmental cues that we would normally get in a school environment surrounded by other students who are there to study, right, are gone. So now we're sitting in our room, and a lot of our brain functions a lot more on the cues around us. It's the idea between environment and conscious will, right? A lot of what we do is a subconscious reaction to
incentive, stimuli.
Yeah, stimuli. Thank you. They're all reactions to the stimuli around us. Normally sitting in front of a book would require that you read the book. Or sitting in front of your computer with Word open would mean that you should start typing, right? But now if your computer, or if you're using multiple monitors or anything, right? If your phone is next to you, and this is and this might be broadly just generally studying, which is why I know a lot of studies have already indicated your study room should be different from where you go to relax, right? Study room should be a quiet area where you can't possibly be distracted. Given the pandemic, given the situation, that's obviously kind of slipped out the window for a lot of people, myself included, right? Even with the aforementioned Pomodoro Technique, right? I'll be writing a physics paper or doing some practice questions for 50 minutes, and the 10-minute YouTube break suddenly turns into a 10-hour YouTube break, and the day is gone. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little, but the point gets across, right? And, well, I hope I'm exaggerating. Anyway, point being, we spent a little bit too long of time on this topic. Point being, cues, stimuli matter in how we learn. Pandemic has forced us to combine all stimuli into one. Our sense of structure has been depleted. I think a lot of people, school or not school, can agree structure throughout these last few months has felt like a foreign concept. So, moving on from that, let's talk about personalization of learning in an online environment. What are your thoughts on that, Matt?
Okay, so, yeah, I guess one thing that online learning offered, which isn't possible without, is the whole idea of asynchronous lectures. And I hadn't really, obviously that was new to me. And I'm gonna be honest, sometimes it was pretty nice. If you don't know, you probably do, but if you don't, the whole idea with asynchronous lectures is instead of everyone going to some Zoom meeting and listening to the professor live, the professor just records their lecture and posts it, and you can watch it at your leisure. And so that's pretty nice when you're trying to schedule out your work week, and maybe the time a synchronous lecture would be at wouldn't work for you, or maybe you just want to do it at a different time when you're more focused. And also, pretty handily, since it's recorded, you can play it at a faster playback speed. Pretty small, but does like kind of half the time you have to commit to it. The issue was what I said before, where you get to listen to it at your leisure. I'm a person where you have I need to be extrinsically motivated, and so asynchronous lectures were pretty hard for me to do on time, because at my leisure would be up like 1 or 2 weeks after I should have. And that connects to the personalization thing, because in an ideal world, you would only do asynchronous lectures if it would work out better for you. But A, it was hard to tell because, as I said, it was new. And B, it wasn't always available. You didn't always have the option. There were a couple classes I took which were only offered asynchronously. So I guess, long story short, I think it was cool. I think online learning is a cool option, and I think within it there are cool options. But I think it should stay as an option.
I think that might be the general takeaway from today is, because I know we've been kind of hating on online learning, right? You also have to remember we've been doing this for like a year and a half straight now. It's gotten to the point where it's a little frustrating, but I diverge. So let me talk about that.
I don't think anyone wanted us to be stuck having to do online learning. So
I think the lack of choice is essentially reducing motivation for online learning as well. I found a statistic on educationdata.org indicating during the pandemic, 42% of students indicated staying motivated was a major problem for them completing coursework online. And I think that comes into that idea of personalization, right? Some people, and like you said with the async, and I'll tie this back to the async and sync classes, right? Some people are very much suited for synchronous lectures, right? Because they need somebody, like you said, to extrinsically sometimes motivate them and keep them engaged the whole time. I personally really like the idea of walking into a lecture hall, walking into a lab, walking into any sort of setting, and being in an environment that essentially forces me to continuously stay focused, right? With built-in breaks, of course, right? Nobody wants to stay focused for 9 hours straight at a time. The other hand, asynchronous classes have also been really nice in some situations, given that, sometimes, hey, I gotta go do this, or maybe I want to go work out at the gym in the morning and I don't want to take a class at 8 a.m. because I know I'm not going to focus, or, hey, this lecture or this topic, I've seen it before, I'm familiar with it, let me quickly put the video on 2 or 3 times speed, get the gist of it again, just refresh it. Or even in general, right? A lot of people in the undergraduate world, at least, were able to increase the course load that they took because they felt there was a lot of time saved by switching to the online learning platforms. And so they were able to, I think, and even in my experience, I knew this first year I would have a lot more time on my hands between not having to commute, and many extracurriculars were canceled already, so I loaded up on credits. Whether that was a good idea or a bad idea, we could talk about later. But a lot of people were able to do that. I think the problem here lies with what you said as well, right? With the idea of motivation is a huge factor in learning in general. Let's say hypothetically, you're Albert Einstein, right? For example, and you just have a crazy IQ, you're able to genetically learn really well. Who's going to learn really well if you don't want to learn something, right? That's the first key factor in any neural response, is the motivation to activate that neural response, if that makes sense. And so the other thing that stems from that, in my opinion, is also just burnout in general. I think after this pandemic, and this is not just solely to education, right? This is on a wide-term scale. We're going to see another silent pandemic of mental health issues arise from isolation, from lack of communication, from loneliness. All of these factors are going to line up. And especially people who are working or students who are used to creating those social bonds, younger students may have a harder time developing social cues, especially those in their progressive stages of young, like late toddlers, early childhood, where a lot of focus on their psychology is around how they form social connections. All of a sudden, if they're only seeing the same 4 or 5 people every day at home and over Zoom, a lot of social etiquettes are going to be lost, a lot of body cue reading. But I think we'll see a lot of repercussions socially, intellectually, and just recovery from this year is going to be something that we haven't even thought about. A lot of people, at least in the United States, have been so focused on what's next that they forgot about what just happened in a way, right? And I don't think the United States in general, and this, I know, I'm sorry, I went off track, this got really broad, but I don't think the United States of America is ready for, to face the consequences of what just happened.
Where are we?
Yeah, you might.
I think you have a point there about burnout, definitely. And it was interesting to me at the end, like, trying to consider why I felt so, like, spent. Because I have been doing this, like, I'm a freshman in college. I've been doing this for 12 years. Arguably for more time, because, like, this year was kind of short in comparison. The college time is shorter. So, I had never felt this tired after a school year ever. And I think just guessing, I would pin it down to the same thing we've been talking about where everything has to be self-motivated. And before I go into that, I do realize it's hard for us to say, as freshmen in college, having done this. We don't really have a benchmark to compare it to what the normal, quote, college experience was supposed to be. I'm more so comparing it to high school at this point, I guess. But having to, like, being forced to do everything myself and, like, schedule completely myself and do all the assignments. And then because everything was so, like, hazy in terms of time management, not really having any breaks, and then also just actually not having any breaks. Hold on. For some reason...
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm actually just infuriated right now, but UMD Dearborn decided it would be a good idea to get rid of winter break, because that will go well. Make all the students do way more work, and then don't give them spring break. I said winter break before, but it was spring break. We had winter break. So that's I guess.
Yeah, okay, University of Michigan Ann Arbor did the same exact thing. There was a lot of outcry. President Schleisel, to remedy this, decided that the best course of action would be to add 2 mental health wellness days instead of a 5-day week. I understand the concern at that point was because of traveling, and I know college students are very angsty to go out and go wherever they want to. It's spring break, right? They don't have to go home yet. But, and a big but there, in that situation, especially in an institution where most of the kids know better than to go out, at least I could probably say this for University of Michigan. I cannot say this for every single school in America. I think the schools in America that weren't going to properly follow social distancing protocols weren't going to follow them anyway. At the University of Michigan, I think most students did a good job with it. When numbers were going up, they took action to help the numbers decline. And I think the lack of a spring break and the lack of a continuous week where assignments were piling up, what ended up happening for those mental health wellness days, and I think Dearborn had a similar situation, was that these mental health wellness days ended up just becoming, oh, I got a test tomorrow instead of today. Let me study for that today. Oh, I have this project due tomorrow instead of today. Let me just do that. Teachers who were quote unquote having to ended up forcing their schedules to be crammed in 1 week so that they wouldn't have to carry it on over. And instead of and they had more time with spring break, but because of the format of online learning, they didn't know how to pace the content in a manner that was efficient, right? I think a lot of classes that would realize 3-4 weeks in, here's a ton of work that you need to do before we have our first exam or our first paper. And I think this might have been a result of a lack of student feedback, like we talked about earlier. But I think the lack of a spring break, I don't know how many other states or schools did this. I know not even every Michigan school did this. I know only the University of Michigan system, U of M Ann Arbor, U of M Dearborn, U of M Flint did that. was a huge mistake on the part of the administration at these institutions. And I think the mental health repercussions and the burnout we saw at the end of that last semester, I don't think I've seen that many people that messed up around finals week and given up on grades and GPAs as I have during that last week.
Yeah, the 1 day, Dearborn did like a 2-day break, but even then, it's like the timeline was so hazy that a 1 week break was actually just inconsequential, or a 1 day break was actually just inconsequential because you just ended up doing what you normally would have done basically, because we were all behind it anyway. So like,
yeah, exactly. I think exactly.
And also it kind of leads in. I kind of felt that the same thing too with weekends. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really have any weekends this year because I just sort of stretched out a 5-day week to a 7-day week. And like looking back at that, it was my responsibility. I'm a broken record here, but with the weekends, it becomes the student's responsibility to manage their time. So you have to create your own weekends. And I didn't, so I didn't have them.
Yeah, and I think we've veered way off topic. Last closing statement on that, I would say, is I agree with that. I think like I said earlier, the main takeaway today is the lack of motivation, and I think you mentioned this earlier, right? And I know this is a psychological fact, or it's been proven through psychology, that habits or forming habits require much less self or intrinsic motivation and have been proven to create better outcomes. So essentially the willpower or the energy spent into motivating yourself to do something every single day or every single week, right? Versus creating a habit out of that, whereas like school provides that habit for you, right? You have to go to school. You have to do this. Okay. Your structure basically looks the same, right? With the freedom of the pandemic came the consequences of that self-motivation being there, right? If you had to continuously say, okay, I got this today. I have to do this. 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 And you have to will yourself every day, knowing that you could get off track if you don't, right? All day, the sheer willpower required for a day-to-day, production rate, I don't think was a sustainable way to go about college. Even if the workload is the same, and I can't tell you because, like Matt said, we are only freshmen in college. This was our first year, and it happened to be within the isolation year. Even if the workload is the same, right? Just the sheer management of having to intrinsically motivate oneself every single day is bound to lead to burnout. Actually, I know we talked about this maybe in our New Year's resolution debate way back a couple of years ago. I think a study came out, and I was reading this. I can't pull up the exact study for you right now because it's in the back of my head. In showing that the rate of people who started diets or started gym regimens on New Year's Day, the people who once, past the initial, whatever you want to call it, honeymoon phase of the resolution, right? Where people, I'm so motivated. That motivation fizzles out after 3 weeks, right? The people who were effectively able to stay in there were people who were able to create habits revolving around their schedule that allowed them to stay in the gym or stay dieting or whatever it might be. If something was inconvenient, if something required a daily struggle every single day and it wasn't sustainable, people would just give it up. And I mean, why wouldn't you, right? If you're nobody wants to feel bad all day. Nobody wants to be constantly drained of energy, constantly thinking, I have to do this. Or not like that. Like, I should do this. I think the mentality from I have to do this to I should do this creates a barrier of energy potential that you need to put into your day that we don't often consider, right? But I think there's a significant factor of when one has to intrinsically motivate themselves versus, I have a class at 10 a.m. on campus. I better get up and go or else I'm going to miss it and I'm going to fall behind. Versus, I have an async lecture. I should probably do that today, right? And before you know it, it's 8 p.m. You've watched all the YouTube videos in the world and played all the Rocket League in the world, and yet you're still in the same place. You still have that workload to do. And, and I think you know where I'm going with that. Yeah, so any last thoughts on that, Matt, before we close up for today?
The last year was like a really big forced experiment about how well does remote learning and also remote work from home, I guess, works. And I think what we learned from it is it's not for everyone. I'm gonna be honest, it's not for me. I think it's really cool, honestly, that there's all this infrastructure now. Like, all these... This is one of the things those articles we were reading had pointed out. Internet connectivity has, like, gone up, and, like, just... There's more... Like, people now know how to use video conferencing stuff like Zoom. People have mics now because they need them. So it's cool that from now on, this is going to be more of an available option. And like I said before, I think online learning can be really good for those circumstances where commuting isn't possible for you, which does happen fairly often, or also just if you find that you learn better online asynchronously, it can be good. Although just as an offside, but there's this CGB Gray video recently about how some schools, I don't know if you saw it, some schools are replacing snow days. They're just getting rid of them.
Yeah,
because
no,
now we have online learning.
Achieve did that, actually. Achieve Charter Academy.
Are you serious?
Achieve
They
Charter,
actually did it?
Achieve Charter Academy added virtual days. I don't remember if they had a hybrid system at the time, a full hybrid system. I think they might have been online at the time, but I think in January they started letting some kids back in, and days that they had snow days, they had less work for sure because teachers still felt bad that they were assigning work on a snow day, but they still had work on snow days, like online async work to complete by the end of the day.
Yeah, so I think this is not related at all, but that's one of the areas where it's an option that you shouldn't take. But anyway, I think it's cool that we have this option, and I think we've all learned a lot in the past year. Mostly I learned my limits.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end it. Pretty much agree with your sentiment there. For those of you who really enjoyed learning, let us know in the learning online rather. Sorry, not learning. I know not many people enjoy learning. That's a joke. Take that out. I'm so tired.
Advocate for learning.
Anyway, for those of you who enjoyed learning online, let us know in the comments below. Tell us why we're wrong. Until then, we'll see you guys next month. See ya.
All right.